Hi, everyone. This is Angela Coulter, a voice of awakened consciousness, a consciousness transformation and ascension guide, an originator of Trinity Energy Progression, bringing you my weekly live stream podcast called Living the Shift. And today we're going to talk about a topic that is near and dear to me because I talk about it a lot with many of my clients, with my friends, with others, my spiritual circle, where it's something that we talk about, we want to talk about like around the edge, but we don't ever want we typically don't want to just delve in and really feel it. But it was interesting as I'm doing this today an hour later than I typically do because I had a session this morning. And it was funny because before the session, I knew I was going to be doing this right after. And I'm like, I have no idea what I'm going to talk about today, except it was funny because I was just sort of in my meditation going, but yeah, whatever, let it come to the surface. And I guess in my session will show me the way, which it did. And I even told my client that, and she's like, oh, what a great topic. It's something I was going to talk about a couple of weeks ago, and I want to talk about it today because it keeps on coming up. We're going through a lot of big changes right now, and I'm coming up to a lot of clients and people I speak with who are having big issues in forgiveness and having kinds of interactions that are sort of not so inspiring. I can't even quite think of the words for it. Not so savory, and then it shifts around into this energy of having this belief that one needs to be punished, that deep down we're like a bad person and things like that. And this happens a lot. This happens a lot with people who I know who have been on this active spiritual journey, who work as what we call light workers for a long time, and it will still come up against this. I believe I need to be punished, or why is this happening? I need to sacrifice myself because I'm not worthy of having this blissful existence, right? So what we turn to, and this particular client I've worked with off and on for years. So it's funny that I forget what we've spoken about in other times past, because like we'll go a year or two without even speaking. We came to this, and it's this. She's like telling me about this relationship. She's telling me about how it turned into sort of like this verbally abusive thing, and she got out of it. It was about 6 months, and she goes, and I thought I was doing so well. I had progressed so much. I was feeling good about myself, or so I thought. And then I get into this relationship, and this person was continuously berating me and triggering me and, making me feel bad about myself. And afterwards, she goes, it's been about a year now since she says, it's been about a year since I broke off that relationship. And she goes, and I've gained like 30 pounds. So I've obviously put this protection around me again, right? And she's like, and it was funny, as soon as she said that, I was like, oh, here that is again. Because if you had that kind of relationship in your reality, reflecting back to you, somebody acting that way towards you, is there's a mirror to you in some way, shape, or form. So number one, it was, how much are you going to take of this before you recognize it, stand in your truth, and walk away, right? And she said it took her about 6 months, which isn't bad, because there's no bad, but there is actually okay, because it was a lot of processing. But then it goes back to, it was funny because I said, so she said to me, I did remember at some point that I know I did something that I think is really bad in another life. And she goes, but I don't know what it is. I've never enabled myself to see that. And I said, you know what? I remember us working on that several years back. I remember us seeing that, but not seeing what it was. And she goes, oh, okay. I forgot that you were the person that I saw that with. And so she goes, but I know that deep down, she goes, and it's funny, as I can accept everybody else and the things they do. She goes, but within me, she goes, there's this piece of me. Yes, I believe I deserve to be punished, and that I'm only so worthy. So think about that. So many of us have that kind of progression in our lives. Like, we only believe we're worth so much, or that this amount of happiness, this amount of prosperity, this amount of blank is enough. And then we sort of hit up this wall, because I hear this a lot. I was like, I've worked with people who are like, I've had a great life. I have nothing to complain about. There's nothing I've done that I could really point to that would make me feel like I deserve to be punished. So then I usually delve into, well, it must have been brought forward from another life, another part of this existence. So we do that. And then when we start looking at that, I'm like, so we used to look at the detail, but really the biggest part of this is for us to be able to look at darkness in a completely different way. And so it's interesting, because as what we call light workers, we talk all the time about being a light worker, but does anybody ever call themselves a dark worker? And I say, well, there's all of us. We all have darkness in us. We all have, anybody can claim it, but as long as we stand in separation and individuality, we have darkness, because that's what creates it. That's part of what creates it. And when we start to equate separation and darkness, right, then we can start seeing it from a different perspective, because we tend to judge darkness and how dark, and what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is evil, all this kind of stuff. And really, if we are to look through the eyes of the divine, as the divine, from this whole consciousness, it's to look at it through this place of unity and unconditional love, and that all of it is perfect in whatever bigger purpose it was there to serve, right? And so we have these historical, really deeply embedded beliefs and habits that cause us to believe that we have to have this fight, the epic fight of dark versus the light, the good versus bad, good versus evil kind of thing. And we've perpetuated that, right? We've had so many wars, and we've had so many crusades, and we've had so many efforts about this battle, right? And yet, really, where is the battle coming from? It within ourselves. If we stand in separation, even if we are conscious in the wholeness, there's some part of darkness that we have been a part of, no matter what, right? I've worked with someone for 5 years now who's imprisoned, who was part of a group of people that made a dumb that's a judgment, that just made a mistake. And there's, when they were 17 and somebody was murdered, right? So I've worked with her for 5 years and taught her meditation. I've taught her energy work, and we've worked a lot on the darkness within ourselves, right? So she's got something right in this lifetime that she can look in the mirror and say, okay, well, this is something that at least it's right up on the table of what to look at, which is being a part of somebody's death, right? At the age of 17. And we've done so much, but the thing is, we've done so much work at looking at that, looking at the bigger picture, forgiving herself, apologizing, seeing, seeing how it fits into the bigger scheme of things, and not just herself, the group of people involved, multiple lifetimes, all this kind of stuff, to come to this place of acceptance. Now, the interesting part is, when I was doing the session with my client earlier this morning, when we were out there, this other client of mine, the one who's in prison, came in to join, and she has created this visage of herself out there, which I think is quite beautiful, which is she's got these two wings, and one is black and one is white, which is really this recognition of where we are, right? And it's that acceptance to realize, we always say, the light encompasses the dark. In duality, the light was created, to be seen through the mirroring of the dark. So they're sort of opposite and equal to each other, thus the yin yang, right? Yin yang. And so when we look at wholeness, right, instead we look at like the creative void being the divine consciousness, and in wholeness, we see how one reflects the other and is part of the whole. So for us to truly come into this place of remembrance, this place of wholeness, is for us to allow ourselves to see not just the light part of ourselves, but the dark part of ourselves, and to forgive ourselves for it, to forgive ourselves for what we've done, what we believe we've done, for what we filter and judge that we've done. The other thing is that we were talking about in this particular session is that, I was showing her out there. I was like, what? And what we do from life to life is really based on the situations that we have available to us. And that's part of our sets of lessons, right? So for example, in a lifetime, we might be a tribal person who is a cannibal, right? Well, in many of those cannibalistic tribes that have existed, the belief was it was actually honoring the person that was eaten by taking on their strength and their energy and all that kind of stuff. So it wasn't wrong, but people who would come from a different kind of background would look at that completely in a horrific way, right? So if you did a lifetime as one of those, and that was part of your culture and what you believed, and then you did another lifetime, then and you have these other beliefs that have been instilled based on these other experiences, then you're going to have these judgments. Then you might hold it, even if you don't consciously remember it. This is something as simple as what you ate, right? And you go, oh my goodness. Yeah, I deserve to be punished because I ate people, right? Like, but you don't even realize that consciously. So that goes on a lot. We talk about that kind of stuff, and I'm like, I don't know why that came up to me. It was just such a weird thing. Maybe it was something that was from another life. I don't know. But what we deem as dark. So everybody wants to be Jesus or Buddha or Krishna, right? Or Tara. But nobody wants to remember being Hitler. And that's the funny part, because it's still a part of us, right? We still have darkness. I mean, it's funny, as much as I work in this and work in wholeness and work in divine consciousness, there were some really dark things I've done in this life. And for me to look at that with forgiveness, self-forgiveness, and acceptance, and actually not even acceptance, but gratitude, to say, wow, what an experience that was. Because guess what? You know what? Even though it might not be as dark as like things like, that I was talking about, but who wants to watch Star Wars without Darth Vader? I mean, think about it. Who wants to see Sleeping Beauty without Maleficent? And by the way, what a beautiful, beautiful illustration we created through that movie Maleficent. I thought it was fabulously done. That shows you two sides of the same coin, right? If something one person might judge as dark, another person does not, right? So darkness, what we consider bad or evil, is really through the filter of individual journeys. And when we transcend that and start to see things from a much higher perspective, we can start to accept that there's a complexity of the different parts of the same picture. And when we can do that, then we stop judging it, and then we can see it within ourselves. So it's sort of, a lot of times, like I said, I used to go right into the individual thing. Right now, I tend to sort of back up and say, okay, so what's this collective energy that affects this individual and prevents them from seeing this within themselves, or prevents them from forgiving themselves? Yeah, Sarah writes, there isn't a story without them, right? Without the villains. We love to create that, right? We love playing. Think about, the way I talk about this too is, think about the lifetimes, right? That, like, say if we step back for a minute and accept we've had, some of us have had many lifetimes, right? And think of each lifetime as a play. And in every play, you take off one costume and you put on another. You play a different role, right? And in some play, you might be the villain. In some play, you might be the martyr, or some play, you might be the hero. Some play, you just might be the chorus. But each one of them is a very rich part of the experience, and you need every part of those plays for the whole story to be conveyed, right? So, like, what fun would it be if you played the same part every time? Like, why even bother? That's the way I look at it. If you're going to play the same part, then why bother? Then it would get boring after a while. That's part of what we created in diversity and separation and this density and this multiverse. And so when we can look at it from that perspective, and yes, there are really things, but the funny part is, look at the movie industry, look at how much darkness we have out there. And we love to go, how many people love to see slasher movies? How many people love to see really dark stuff? But it doesn't make it wrong. It's almost like, oh, I'm going to let that little dark piece of me out of the closet, so I could be horrified and say how terrible it was, but I'm going to sit and watch it. so it's this thing, but yet we hold such resentment within ourselves about some of the roles that we've played in other plays. Say we just called it other plays, right, and looked at it from that perspective, instead of just saying, well, damn, I did a great job playing that part. Okay, and I also did a great job doing this part, and everything in between. And then you start having the gratitude and seeing like the bigger picture, right? And I even tell people, no matter who you want to call, like who you want to call the epitome of darkness, there is a reflection of that within us, right? And there's a reason that they will come and reflect that back to us. So going back to my client, we're talking about the relationship that she had where the person was very, abusive verbally and stuff like that. And I said, it's interesting because all I'm feeling and hearing as you're saying this is that he was reflecting a voice back to you that you thought you had gotten rid of. And so if you have that voice coming back to you and that you have it so deeply ingrained that you must have somebody in your life to scream that in your face, right? Then there's a part of you that feels like this unworthiness. And this, I said, but what I'm feeling is you believe you need to be punished. Obviously you still have some judgment in there. And I'll tell you, the thing is about our spiritual progression, for us to really get to this state of enlightenment, awakened consciousness, and to live it, is to accept that and embrace that part of ourselves as part of the whole and divine. Because there's nothing, if we consider everything as part of the whole, then even the darkness is part of the divine. When we say we're light workers, we're also dark workers, because we're working in the light within the darkness, within the separation. And that makes it quite beautiful if you think of our depth and our color and, how much we can see the light because of the contrast of the dark. That's part of what we've created. So what's key is being able to look in the mirror to get to this place of transcendence and being able to say, okay, well, let me see the bigger picture. Let me see how this fits in the bigger picture. For every action, there's a reaction. For everything we've created in this multiverse of duality, there is, I don't want to say a consequence or a result. Not a consequence, a result. And in separation, we've created the need to have catalysts and propulsions that cause us to move from one thing to another. And sometimes we want to be really dense about not getting the message of propulsion or, shifting into another space. And we've gotten into this habit of depending on that propulsion. And think about it. We have so much going on today having to do with like politics, and there's so much outrage and everything else. And look at how crazy. And I honestly, somebody was saying to me not too long ago, said something about, I was at a party and somebody said something to me about the president. And I looked at the person and I said, oh, we have a president. Like, and it was just being, and I'm like, because everything that we have, and I don't mean, and I'm not saying this to criticize, but everything that's out there, it's almost become so outrageously broken that it's a caricature, right? So I'm like, it's almost like I'm watching the cartoons every day, even though I don't watch the news or whatever, but just seeing what's going on around us. But those are all messages within ourselves that have caused us to motivate us. Look at how many people are becoming motivated now to be a part, to create change, right? And depending on who you ask will depend on what the judgment of that change is. So here's the funny thing too. Like I was saying, if you look at from one life to another, but even if you look from one like one group to another, right? One group of people who have a certain set of beliefs might think of a certain kind of change as being fabulous and expansive, right? And another one might think it's terrible because of something, right? Which group is right? Which group is wrong? Neither, because it's based on the filter of their own journey. So when we can see things from the bigger picture, like, right, like, so as much as somebody might be what we call a light worker, we are also angels of destruction. And that might be seen as darkness, because we are disassembling those facades that don't serve us anymore, so that we can again exist in a place of unified unconditional love. And truly, and the first place for us to start is within ourselves. So when we do that inner work, what we call the inner work, right? Meditation, self energy work, right? Any kind of processing, when we are really willing to look in those mirrors, that's when we really can see past the reflection of the dark to say, look at the facets that it creates from that darkness, and look at the whole of what I am. And that is divine. And part of that is how we get to forgiveness. We get to very semantic, very myopic kind of things on what we need to forgive ourselves for, right? And yet it's usually tied to a much bigger picture, another much bigger perception of the picture. So what if we just started at the biggest part of the picture, right? Instead of calling ourselves, losers because we're human, or like that we're imperfect and that we, are in lack, that's all separation based. And again, that's sort of the opposite. It's a propulsion thing, right? But if we say, no, I'm already coming to the plate as complete and divine and infinitely capable and perfect for where I am right now, in the environment I'm in, for the set of lessons I'm in, for the catalyst that I serve as well as the other catalysts around me, for propulsion and change and moving forward, the more it becomes accepted, and the more we can see ourselves, and then the smaller things stop feeling so big. And then we say, okay, I see its perfection in the bigger picture of things. Even if you don't have that clear view, but you'll start to get it the more you accept. Because when we accept, if we deny ourselves, if we want to, if we want to deny ourselves any part of us as we are, then, and we put it in the closet and then we repress it, well, guess what? Then we give it more power. And that's what I was going to before, and I got off track. But the whole battle against light versus evil is really sort of funny to me. And in perspective, like a long time back, I got this understanding that, darkness is created through separation, right? And the energies and emotions of separation have to do with like fear, anxiety, anger, resentment, right? Regret, all that kind of stuff. But so anything that we do in separation is adding to the power and the depth of the darkness. So if we fear it, if we are angry at it, we create it even more. When we love it and embrace it as part of ourselves, well, then there's no separation, there's no resistance, there's no exclusion, and then it literally just goes away and incorporates back into the wholeness. So if you think about that, it's like, well, of course that makes so much sense, but yet we're in such the practice of doing the opposite. And I always call this, I think this is opposite world. I really believe there's a show on Netflix not too long that's been going on, Stranger Things, right? And they call the other dimension opposite, the opposite dimension or something like that. And I'm like, I think this is the opposite dimension, but of course we don't think that because we're opposite. so things to consider, and part of this is really to have that. That's what we call shadow work, and in terms of energy healing and stuff. And shadow work is some of the most productive stuff, because here's the thing: when we stop denying ourselves that part of us and we accept it and embrace it as part of ourselves, as part of what's made the rainbow and the prism of what we are, then we actually take leaps and bounds in our consciousness, and we jump like eons beyond where we are, because then we're not repressing anything. Because if we're repressing anything, it becomes like a boulder in a big river. And the current, if the current is flowing, it's fine. But then you put a boulder in it, well, then you're going to create more resistance, and the water's forced to move around it, which then gives the water less space to get, to follow the current, which makes it more forceful, sometimes like raises the water. And then the more boulders you put in there, the more the water gets blocked, until you then get really blocked. And that's how I explain that to people energetically. When we get really blocked, that's when we have all these boulders in the way of resistance and repression and all that kind of stuff. But when we start looking at them and we embrace them as part of ourselves, they just become, they just sort of like fade away. And then there's more opening, so that the current, the flow, as I call it, the flow, becomes more and more easy and prominent. And then things go much faster in terms of consciousness and awareness, and living in a space of being the divine embodied as we are. So that's the thought for today. And then I could go on this for days and hours. I've had years of experience of working with this, but there's a lot to be said about doing what we call shadow work, and looking at things from this perspective, and shifting the way we look at the darkness, and not only shifting it, but then embracing it, and just first becoming neutral to it, accepting it, forgiving it, and then embracing it, and allowing it to reassimilate, and seeing the prism for what has been created through that creation of separation, propulsion, motivation, anything you want to call it, is based on this, equal and opposite. And when we allow ourselves to commit to, I'm going to live in this place, I'm going to exist from a place of wholeness where I don't need propulsion, I can simply be, and I can be all of it, and I don't need something to push me, that's when we really take leaps and bounds in terms of evolution and our spiritual consciousness. So that's it for today. Have a great week. Thank you for joining me. This is Angela Coulter with Living the Shift.